It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that gives no warning of the world it is about to become. In the kingdom of Elmsworth, mornings at Ashcombe Palace usually moved with a practiced, unhurried rhythm, the clink of porcelain in the breakfast room, the distant bark of the corgis in the east garden, the soft shuffle of aides carrying folders no one outside the palace walls would ever read. But on this particular morning, the rhythm broke. Princess Adelaide of Elmsworth, wife of Crown Prince Frederick and mother to 3 children, stood at the window of her private study with a single sheet of paper trembling faintly in her hand. It was not a letter from a head of state, nor a diplomatic cable, nor anything the palace communications office had drafted. It was a note from a pediatric specialist in the capital, and it confirmed what she had feared for nearly 2 months. Her youngest son, 6-year-old Prince Oliver, had a chronic condition that would require lifelong care. Adelaide did not cry. She had learned, over a decade of public life, how to hold grief in a place where it could not reach her face. But something in her chest tightened as she read the words a second time, then a third, as though repetition might soften them. Outside, the palace gardeners were trimming the hedges along the fountain walk, utterly unaware that inside the pale stone building behind them, a mother's world had just quietly rearranged itself around a single diagnosis. It had begun months earlier, in ways so small that no one thought to name them. Oliver, usually the most restless of the 3 children, the one who could not sit through a family dinner without swinging his legs under the table, had started growing tired in the afternoons. He would lie down on the nursery rug mid-play, blinking slowly, and Adelaide told herself it was simply a growth spurt, the kind that hits children like a wave and passes just as fast. Prince Frederick noticed too, though neither of them said much about it at first. One evening, Oliver rested his head against his father's shoulder for nearly 20 minutes without moving, and Frederick, brushing a hand through his son's hair, caught Adelaide's eye across the room. Neither spoke. But something passed between them, a flicker of unease neither wanted to name aloud. By early autumn, the flicker had become a private worry that followed Adelaide from room to room. She began keeping a small notebook in her desk drawer, jotting down dates and details, a stumble on the garden steps, an unusual paleness after swimming lessons, a night when Oliver woke twice asking for water he didn't drink. She brought the notebook to the first specialist appointment herself, without an aide, without even telling the palace scheduling office the true purpose of the visit. The doctor was careful and kind but non-committal, the way doctors are when they suspect more than they're willing to say. He wanted more tests. He wanted to watch a few specific patterns over the following weeks. Adelaide left that appointment with a hollow feeling beneath her ribs that she recognized, uncomfortably, as the beginning of fear. Inside the palace, the change was subtle at first, but the household staff, many of whom had served the family for over a decade, began to sense it before they understood it. Oliver's public appearances were quietly trimmed from the calendar. A ribbon cutting here, a hospital visit there, rescheduled under vague explanations about family scheduling. Adelaide, who had always been warm and unguarded with staff, grew a touch more private, stepping out of meetings when her phone buzzed, pausing mid-sentence when she heard a child cough down the corridor. Her eldest daughter, 9-year-old Princess Beatrice, seemed to sense something too, taking her little brother's hand more often on garden walks, as if some instinct told her to hold on a little tighter. The moment that broke through Adelaide's careful denial came on an ordinary Thursday morning at the foot of the nursery stairs. Oliver hesitated there, not out of the usual morning stubbornness, but with something that looked closer to uncertainty. A small pause, a swallow, the faintest tremor in his hand as he gripped the banister. Adelaide knelt beside him. "Are you all right, my darling?" she asked softly. He nodded, but his eyes told a different story. She sent him off to school with a kiss on his forehead, then closed her study door behind her and sat at the edge of the sofa with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went pale. When her private secretary came in minutes later, Adelaide simply said, "Please call the specialist. I want the next round of tests moved up." From that point on, the family's protective instincts sharpened. Meetings between Frederick and the palace's senior advisors moved behind closed doors. Adelaide's public engagements were rescheduled with unusual frequency, always under administrative language vague enough to raise no questions. During a quiet weekend visit to the countryside residence of Frederick's aunt, Duchess Eleanor, Oliver sat down abruptly on a garden step, rubbing his arm with a wince he tried to hide. Eleanor, a sharp-eyed woman not easily fooled by polite deflection, caught Adelaide's gaze across the terrace. For the first time, Adelaide didn't try to explain it away. Later, away from the children, Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture from a woman known more for composure than warmth. "You're doing everything right," she said. "Whatever this is, you're facing it head-on." Adelaide's voice caught as she answered, "I just want him to be all right." The diagnosis arrived on a cold November evening, in an envelope left on the polished table of Adelaide's private sitting room. She knew before she opened it. 2 days of waiting had worn her down to something quiet and brittle, and when she finally read the specialist's careful, precise language, the room seemed to still around her. The condition was chronic, manageable, not fatal, but permanent, the kind of diagnosis that lives in the narrow space between relief and heartbreak. She didn't cry. She simply sat, breathing slowly, papers resting in her lap, as though trying to find solid ground beneath her. It was Frederick who found her there, his coat still carrying the chill of the evening air. He read the papers slowly, jaw tightening, and set them down as if they were fragile. "We can manage this," Adelaide whispered, though her voice betrayed her. Frederick took her hand. "We will," he said. "We always do." But even as he said it, he understood what the diagnosis truly meant, not just a medical reality, but a shift in the life his son would now carry, and the scrutiny that would eventually follow once the truth became public. A royal family rarely gets the luxury of a private struggle for long. Within the hour, only a small circle knew: the king, Duchess Eleanor, the family's private secretary, and a single trusted communications advisor. Files were guarded, language in internal memos deliberately vague. When Eleanor arrived the next morning, she was briefed plainly, without the emotional softening Adelaide might have wanted to give herself. "He is stronger than he knows," Eleanor told her. "And he has you." Adelaide nodded, swallowing hard. "I just want him to grow up without this shadow over him." Eleanor's expression softened in a way rarely seen. "Children adapt faster than we do," she said. "It's the world that struggles, not them." The king, informed later that day, sat with the news in a long silence before murmuring, "My poor boy," meaning both his grandson and the son who would now carry the weight of fatherhood and public duty together. The question that followed, quietly at first and then more urgently, was not whether the truth would eventually reach the public, but when, and how much control the family would have over the telling of it. For weeks, the palace operated like a fortress holding its breath. Oliver's reduced appearances had already stirred quiet murmurs in the press, small and speculative at first, the kind of chatter that grows like frost on glass. Communications advisors drafted 3 possible paths forward: an early, controlled release of the diagnosis, a partial statement acknowledging only that Oliver required schedule adjustments for health reasons, or continued silence for as long as it could be sustained. Adelaide hated every version. "I want him protected from scrutiny for as long as possible," she said in one tense meeting. "He's so young. He deserves that." But everyone in the room understood, without needing to say it, that silence has a shelf life, and speculation left unchecked tends to grow crueler than the truth ever would. The turning point came not from a tabloid reporter, but from an internal slip, a misrouted administrative note at the hospital where Oliver had been evaluated, glimpsed briefly by someone who should never have seen it. No diagnosis was named, but a royal code attached to a child's file was enough to spark a dangerous kind of curiosity. Within days, a persistent journalist contacted a junior palace press officer with a carefully worded question about chatter from inside medical circles regarding the youngest child of Elmsworth. It was the moment Adelaide had dreaded since the day she first opened that quiet notebook in her desk drawer. She and Frederick stood together near the tall windows of the private drawing room that evening, watching the winter light fade over the gardens. "They know something," Frederick said. Adelaide wrapped her arms around herself against a cold that had little to do with the temperature. "What do we do?" she asked. Frederick was quiet for a moment before answering. "We tell the truth," he said. "But only the part that belongs to us. Not the part that belongs to him." The statement Adelaide ultimately wrote was not the long, cautious document the communications office had prepared overnight. It was a single handwritten page, plain and steady, offering no details beyond what the world had already begun to sense: that their youngest child was receiving medical care, that the family was hopeful, and that they were asking, simply, for privacy. When Frederick read it, he said only, "It's honest. And it protects him." Adelaide answered quietly, "That's all I want." The statement went out on a pale December morning. Within minutes, newsrooms across the kingdom paused mid-broadcast, and the public absorbed the news the way people absorb any truth spoken plainly by someone they had only ever seen composed, with a kind of stunned tenderness. Inside Ashcombe Palace, the family gathered quietly. Oliver, tugging at his mother's sleeve, asked why so many people suddenly seemed to care about him. Adelaide knelt down, pulled him close, and gave him the only answer that mattered. "Because you are loved," she said. In the weeks that followed, life did not return to what it had been before. It rarely does, after a truth like that is finally spoken aloud. But something steadier took its place. Oliver continued his treatments with the quiet resilience children so often surprise their parents with, more curious about his hospital visits than afraid of them. Beatrice grew fiercely protective of her little brother, walking a half-step closer to him wherever they went. And Adelaide, who had spent months carrying the weight of an unspoken fear, found that speaking it aloud had not diminished her strength but revealed it. She had feared, more than anything, that the world would see her son as fragile. Instead, what the world saw was a family choosing honesty over silence, and a mother who had refused to let rumor write her child's story before she had the chance to tell it herself. Winter eventually gave way to spring at Ashcombe, the gardens blooming again along the fountain walk as though nothing had happened at all. But something had changed, quietly and permanently, in the way the family held itself together. Not through the formality of titles or the machinery of the palace, but through the simple, fierce loyalty of people determined to protect one of their own. And though no crown or ceremony could have prepared Adelaide for that November evening with the envelope on the table, she came to understand, in the months that followed, that the truest measure of her role was never found in public duty at all. It was found in a small hand curled under a cheek at bedtime, in a whispered promise kept, and in a mother's quiet, unshakable resolve to face the world for the sake of a child who had never asked to be seen.